Welcome to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. I am Adam Rake alongside of Kimmy Chex, Marcus Grant. One game in the books for Week 5 already. Your Chicago Bears victorious over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tom Brady still looking for a fifth down. What up? What up? Tom Brady not living so well, but Kimmy, how you living?
I'm living so good. Congrats to your Chicago Bears. I saw the other day you were wearing a shirt. It was Tampa Bay, and you were probably repping that. But I'm good. My Kansas City Chiefs are going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. It's always a really fun divisional game for us. Yesterday, to celebrate and get ready for the moment, I made some homemade styled Kansas City barbecue ribs. So I got the ice of Patrick Mahomes and barbecue sauce running through my veins. So I'm excited for this Chiefs game. Marcus, how are you to this Sunday?
Well, you say Chiefs Raiders, and it goes back to my childhood, and I'm thinking it should be a Don Criqui, Bob Trumpy NBC afternoon game. But no, real talk, like I sort of woke up like the Mr. Krabs meme where like everything was shifted around me. I checked Twitter. I see that a game has been postponed, potentially rescheduled. Still waiting to see what happens on Tuesday, I should say. And hey, look, it's a weird time. We knew this was going to be kind of a wild season, but here we are. We're ready to go. We're going to make the best of it.
Yeah, and we do have some breaking news this morning. But before we get to that, just want to let everybody know that if you have any questions leading up to your Week 5 games, make sure you hit us up on Twitter at NFL Fantasy. And, of course, if you're watching this show on YouTube, our Michael F. Florio is answering questions. The F is for floral. As you see, his brand new shirt from Kohl's. He went into Kohl's this weekend, opened a charge account, and said, the floral shirts, I'll take all of them. I want every single one of them. But, so he will be there answering questions, and I'm sure you have a lot of questions about some of the news that came down this morning. Let's take a look right now at a statement released by the NFL regarding the Broncos and Patriots game that is postponed. The game was scheduled for Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern, and unfortunately that game will not be played. Details on a new game and date will be announced shortly. So both teams are now on a bye in Week 5, and of course, the player's safety is the utmost concerned right now, which is why the NFL made that decision. In addition, the Titans announced they have also shut down their facility temporarily after a staff member tested positive for COVID-19. That game was scheduled, or is still scheduled, for Tuesday. As we're speaking to you right now, no decision has been made on that game, and of course, if that decision comes down during the show, we will let you know. And of course, Marcus, I'm going to throw this to you to start off. Again, player safety, the utmost concern, and we don't want to seem callous, but I know that we love enjoying, we love playing fantasy football, and this is a question that we're all in this. So, Marcus, what advice would you give to everybody who is dealing with this?
Well, I think you try to buy yourself as much time as you possibly can. So for your skill position players, your wide receivers, running backs, tight ends, depending on your league, I would say moving them to the flex spot if you can, and then trying to see if there are guys available on the waiver wire in later games, whether it is a late game on Sunday, the Sunday night game with the Seahawks and Vikings, or even the Monday night game with the Chargers and Saints. If you can get a player from one of those games and just try to buy yourself as much time as possible, look, we are going to know, I think, hopefully by tonight, if not certainly by Monday, whether or not that Tuesday game is going to be played. So the more time you can buy yourself, I think the better off you're going to be. I know another situation is to sort of talk with your commissioner about having maybe a backup situation where you designate a backup player to kind of go in your lineup in the event that this Bills-Titans game is not played on Tuesday. But just know there's no one-size-fits-all situation for every single league. Everything's going to be different. It's going to be hard. It's sort of hard on all of us. If that's a silver lining, for whatever it is, at least understand that we're all sort of trying to deal with this together, but it's going to be weird. It's going to be tough, and you just kind of have to make the best of what you can.
Right, and I know you mentioned heading to the waiver wire and looking for some guys. I think the number one position that a lot of people are struggling to fill, and maybe this is just a personal thing, it's the running back position, right? We've seen a lot of injuries. Now they're bye weeks, games being rescheduled and postponed. Some guys who are available on the waiver wire, you talked about that Monday game, the Chargers versus the Saints. One of those guys is Justin Jackson. Some other guys who are available and not owned in a lot of leagues are Chase Edmonds, Ernest Johnson, Keyshawn Vaughn, Frank Gore. I mean, these are deeper names games, but if you're absolutely desperate, it's worth taking a look and heading to the waiver wire right this second. So then you're not in a situation, later today or tomorrow, if we do find out that Bills-Titans game is canceled and that you do have a backfill ready to go.
Yeah, and it's not quite an apples to apples comparison of just pretending like a player like Derrick Henry is a game time decision. How would you manage that if he was? You would have some other guys lined up. I know it's not the same because you can't just put his handcuff in after that, but you do if you have somebody like I have DJ Chark in a league where he was on the bench and I had Derrick Henry in the flex spot. I'm probably going to make the calculated decision to put DJ Chark in there because he's a good player and I have that option. If I had less desirable options, I would probably wait a little bit more. If I have Joshua Kelly or somebody like that, then I advise me a little bit of time. And it also brings up, too, we have some actives and inactives to go through here as well as we continue to move on. And I know that this is going to be a fluid situation and did want to point out, though, some other big news that came down this morning is that Julio Jones is going to be inactive today with a hamstring injury, but we do get a couple of good receivers back. Deontay Johnson is active with his toe injury. Juju Smith-Schuster is active with his knee injury. Lamar Jackson, of course, missed a couple of practices last week, but he is good to go. Joe Mixon also is going to be available today. So, Marcus, why don't I throw to you? What is the impact, though, with Julio Jones out? What is the impact on Calvin Ridley? Should we be more concerned about him this week, or is this better for him?
I think it's better for him. I mean, I think he's going to get targets. Here's the thing. He was already getting a ton of targets. We already know he's sort of a touchdown machine. So I don't know how much better it can get for him, but I think you put him in. I mean, I think obviously you're putting him in. I think you can feel certainly very comfortable with him, especially I think after last week with him not doing anything at all. I think the Falcons understand that they've got to put the football in his hands. So I look for them to find more creative ways to get him out in space, to get the ball in his hands. So look for him to make plays. I think the other guy that you really could maybe look at is Olamide Zaccheaus, who's certainly deeper down the roster. But in this situation, he's going to get on the field, and he should get some looks with Julio Jones not available.
Right. And, a huge question that we see with this Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones news and, with Julio being out is, well, do I start Calvin Ridley? You absolutely do. Because I personally don't have better wide receivers. He's been a stud in fantasy football this entire season. So, take it with a grain of salt. I still know that there is some concern and some question over what his production is going to look like. But unless you have someone who is arguably better, you don't want to risk the chances of having him on your bench and then having a breakout game against the Panthers.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to get too cute with that. And another player who is active today is Le'Veon Bell. And Marcus, I know you're getting a lot of questions about Le'Veon Bell. We look at it and we're like, I don't want to touch that guy. But a lot of people are in a situation where they're thinking about starting him. What has been the advice that you've been giving out with him?
Yeah, I mean, I've been recommending to put him in as a flex this week. It's hard to trust the Jets. I understand that, and especially this week with no Sam Darnold. Joe Flacco is going to get the start at quarterback, but it does seem like this is a situation where they're going to have to lean on Le'Veon Bell maybe a little more than they would have in any other week. And the Cardinals have given up some fantasy points to the running back position, so it's not as though it is a completely scary matchup. So I think this is a week where you can sort of count on him as a flex. If you are really hurting, as Kimmy mentioned, with that running back position being what it is, I can certainly make the case for him as an RB2. But I do think he should find some space in a lot of people's lineups.
Right, and speaking of matchups, this may be one of the most favorable ones for Le'Veon Bell to return and play against. The Cardinals, have allowed 4 different top 24 running backs this season, and with the Jets not really having a lot of receiving options, Le'Veon Bell could be that guy to step up for that offense. Again, I would temper your expectations, but with a lot of us really hurting at the running back position, if you're desperate, I really don't have any problem, like Marcus said, putting Le'Veon Bell in that flex spot.
Kimmy, you're talking about expectations there. Obviously, last week, Joe Mixon came out, scored 42 fantasy points in his breakout game. What are his expectations for this week?
I mean, I think the train is hot on Joe Mixon, and it goes to show, even in a tough matchup, he can perform well. Now, speaking of tough matchups, I do not think he's going to go out and put up 42 fantasy points against the Baltimore Ravens. But again, I am not going to risk putting him on the bench. I do think maybe this could be one of his more ceiling games last week. But I'm holding on to him, and I'm holding on hope, and he is the #1 running back in that offense. Obviously, we know that Joe Burrow also likes to throw the ball. He's putting up crazy numbers and breaking all types of rookie NFL records. But Joe Mixon is fitting in this offense, and I do think he's going to have a good game. I don't know if he's going to have 2 touchdowns yet again. But I don't know, high expectations and a lot of hype on Joe Mixon. I will say, if fantasy managers are thinking that he really did hit his ceiling game and you need some more depth at the wide receiver or tight end position, maybe if he does perform well again this week, this is the time to go out and see if you can get a trade in return for Joe Mixon. But if I were you, I would hang on to him really close and tightly because I do think he's going to have a good year.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you still have him on your roster, I think you're playing him this week. I'm not excited about what his prospects are against this Ravens defense. I also worry whether or not the game script is going to go away from him. If Baltimore starts scoring a lot of points and the ball ends up in the hands of Joe Burrow, we have seen that when the Bengals have to play catch-up, it's a lot of Gio Bernard on the field. I was really sort of advocating that you try to trade Joe Mixon after his huge game last week. But if he's still on your roster, I doubt you have a lot of better options, so you're probably playing him. I just would not expect a huge return from him fantasy-wise this week.
And someday I want to get to the bottom of why he's not out there in passing situations. All right, time now for 15 for 15, presented by Geico. We're dishing out our top 15 starts of the week and then some, because it's Sunday Fun Day! And let's start with the quarterback position. Here are the quarterback. Yeah, hit those air horns. Let's see the quarterback coming up. Kyler Murray, Teddy Bridgewater, Jared Goff, Daniel Jones, Justin Herbert. Marcus, I'm going to kick you know what? Every week you like to go off menu. You have to pick one of these guys. Who's it going to be?
I think I'm going to go with the Justin Herbert this week. That sounds
okay.
Herbert. It rhymes with sherbet, and rainbow sherbet is delicious. Look, he has gotten the starting job for the rest of the year per head coach Anthony Lynn. So there is that confidence now that he can go out and not make, and if he makes a mistake, that he's not going to have to look over his shoulder to see if somebody else is coming in. So there's certainly that confidence. But on top of it, he's got a very good matchup against the Saints, who have given up a ton of fantasy points, given up more than 22 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. I also sort of like what it means for his pass catchers. Having Justin Herbert in there has done wonders for Hunter Henry, for Keenan Allen. It was working for Austin Eckler, certainly, before he was injured. So I think if you were hurt at the quarterback spot, and again, look, if you were worried about Josh Allen and what happens to him potentially on Tuesday night, this is a Monday night game. So you can go pick up Justin Herbert and have him available just in case something happens for this Tuesday game.
Right, I love Justin Herbert. But another guy I love, and I'm going to stick to menu like Adam Ring said, I want to talk about Teddy Bridgewater. He had his best game of the season last week against the Arizona Cardinals. He put up almost 27 fantasy points, and I really do think that he has an opportunity to do it against the Atlanta Falcons. I know this is a guy who we really advocated for people to stream and start this week, especially if you had a Josh Allen type of situation, but going up against the Falcons, and why I think this is so good for Teddy B. The Falcons have allowed a top 3 fantasy quarterback in 3 of 4 games this season, and they're also allowing the most fantasy points per game to QBs this season. That's an average of just under 33 fantasy points. So with Teddy Bridgewater really getting comfortable in this offense and looking at some of his weapons, guys like Robbie Anderson, I think the game script goes to show that this could be a volatile matchup of where they're going to keep going and throwing the ball back and forth. So Teddy Bridgewater, start him, get him into your lineup.
And here are the week 5 starting running backs, including me, going back to Kenyon Drake because I just cannot help myself. Miles Sanders, Kareem Hunt, even though that's a tough matchup this week against the Indianapolis Colts, one of the toughest run defenses, one of the toughest defenses in the league. But Kimmy, you know what? I'm going to allow you. You may go off menu. Who do you got?
I'm going to go off menu because, again, this position's really deep, and we need to start looking at guys who are kind of sleepers and streamers. And I, by no means, think Josh Kelly is a sleeper, and that's why I want to start him this week. I understand against the running back position, people could say, oh no, this is a really tough matchup against the Saints. But the Saints are in the middle of the pack in terms of fantasy points allowed to running backs. They've allowed 4 rushing touchdowns. That's almost 65 fantasy points on the season. Now, I understand Josh Kelly is still going to have to split work and split time with Justin Jackson, another guy that we've been hype on the last few weeks. However, I do think he is going to get some red zone looks and opportunities, and because of that, I feel comfortable starting him this week against the Saints.
Well, I know people always sort of look down at picking low-hanging fruit, but my thought is low-hanging fruit tastes just as good as the stuff at the top of the tree, and it's not as much work. That's why I'm going with Clyde Edwards-Helaire going against the Raiders. Las Vegas has given up the most fantasy points per game to the running back position. They have been absolutely shredded on the ground. And I know people are sort of disappointed with CEH. I don't really get it. I feel like he's sort of a victim of his own week 1 success, and so now everybody expecting that from him every week. But he's still playing very well. I think this is going to be one of those potential smash games where everybody sort of jumps back on board and remembers why they spent an early round draft pick on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So this is a chance for everybody to sort of exhale and realize that they have a very good running back on their roster.
Clyde Edwards-Helaire scoring double-digit fantasy points every week, averaging more than 100 scrimmage yards per game. Here are the starting wide receivers I like this week. Adam Thielen, Robbie Anderson, CeeDee Lamb, Tyler Lockett, Will Fuller. Marcus, though, you like another Seahawks receiver, though. Who is that?
Yeah, it's sort of like ordering from the In-N-Out secret menu. You got the Tyler Lockett there, but I'm gonna upgrade it and go get the DK Metcalf on that side because look, both Seahawks receivers are having fantastic seasons, and they both have a great matchup this week against the Minnesota Vikings in a game that could potentially be pretty high scoring. The Vikings have given up the 4th most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position, and look, they're struggling against guys running deep routes. That's what Metcalf does well, and he's got a quarterback in Russell Wilson, who is arguably the best deep ball thrower in the league. This is set up for Metcalf to have an enormous game on Sunday night.
All right, speaking of staying in this exact game, the Seahawks versus the Vikings, I want to go over to the other receiver on the other team, Mr. Consistent, Mr. Adam Thielen. Now, he's had 4 receiving touchdowns this season. That's tied for second amongst all wide receivers in the league. He's averaging just under 19 fantasy points per game. And this is a really good matchup because, yes, Russell Wilson is having a really good season and he's throwing all types of touchdowns. That's because his defense are giving up all types of points. And I think that's going to be another situation in this game. The Seahawks have allowed the most fantasy points to wide receivers this season, 65 fantasy points to be exact. And they've also allowed 7 top 12 wide receivers in 4 games this season. I think all things point positive for Adam Thielen, so he's going to continue to be Mr. Consistent and should obviously be a must-start wide receiver this week.
I would even say all 4 of those wide receivers if you want to throw in Justin Jefferson as well. And that was 15 for 15 presented by Geico. Up next, we're going position by position, giving you our favorite fantasy hero candidates for the week. These guys are going to save your squads in week 5. Because we can be heroes just for one day. I wish I could fly like Patrick Mahomes. Like, you know how he can catch? He can catch the ball now, too? That's not fair. NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico rolls on. One person's fight is never one person's fight. It takes all of us to fight cancer. Join the NFL and the American Cancer Society in the fight today by talking to your doctor or reminding a loved one about getting screened. Visit NFL.com/crucial catch to learn more. Here are my stardom tight ends for Week 5. Hunter Henry, Zach Ertz. Welcome back to Fantasy Prominence. Greg Olsen, Evan Ingram, good matchup. Tyler Higbee, of course, did want to point out that as poorly as the Seahawks have been against opposing wide receivers, they have been tough against tight ends. So Kyle Rudolph is somebody that perhaps you stay away from this week. But anyways, welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico. Adam Rank, Gimme Jacks, Marcus Grant over there. Be sure to send us your questions at NFL Fantasy, or if you're on YouTube, our Michael F. Florio is in the chat function answering as many questions as humanly possible, but we do want to lighten the load for him a little bit. Let's answer some fan questions right now, though, if we can. All right. Michael Gallup or Calvin Ridley in a tough matchup, full PPR. Marcus, why don't you take this one?
I'm going Ridley all day. I know he had the bad week last week, but he's at least getting more consistent targets. Michael Gallup's season has not been what we wanted it to be so far, so I'm going to go with the guy that I feel like is going to get the ball more consistently.
All right, next question coming in. Mostert or Parker, half-point PPR. Kimmy, who are you going with?
You know what? Speaking of consistency, I'm going to stay with Devontae Parker on this one. He's seen a crazy amount of targets with Ryan Fitzpatrick at the quarterback position for the Dolphins. So I'm going to stick with him and let Mostert continue to heal and go upwards and just let him ease back into one game before I get him back into my starting lineup.
That makes a lot of sense. And we had Melvin Gordon now on a bye. Should he go with Johnson or J.D. McKissick? I am going to go, wait, let me look at this. Sorry, my screen, D'Ernest Johnson. I'm so sorry. My screen, listen, I got 1,000 tabs up. It's hard to keep track of everything that is going on. You know what the problem with D'Ernest Johnson this week is something we talked about a moment ago about how difficult that Colts matchup is, but I just trust him to be involved a little bit more in this matchup. So I would go with D'Ernest in that one. Hopefully he will be a fantasy hero for you this week. And speaking of which, speaking of fantasy heroes, let's go position by position to give some not so obvious guys that we think can crush. And Marcus, I'm going to start with you. Give us an RB2 that we could go with this week.
Well, it's weird to talk about Todd Gurley as an RB2, but this is where we are now. I mean, this is sort of, this is sort of what he has become in our fantasy world. The thing about Gurley is that his yardage totals have not been great necessarily this season, but he keeps finding the end zone. That's one thing that over the last couple of seasons has kept his value afloat. And I do like the matchup this week against the Panthers. I talked about the Raiders having the worst run defense against fantasy running back. Well, the Panthers aren't far behind them. They are second. So I can see a situation where Gurley maybe doesn't get a ton of yards, but I wouldn't be surprised if he finds his way into the end zone a couple of times and ends up having a pretty good day.
Yeah, I saw him a couple of weeks ago against the Bears get into the end zone, and then he had another game with the touchdowns. He's not involved in the passing game as much as we'd like, but as you said, still a really good start this week. I'm going to pick DJ Moore as my wide receiver too, which if you're going off of ADP, this is an obvious pick, but the way the production has been this season, Robbie Anderson has been playing very well. The one thing that I do want to point out, and I don't want people to get into a habit of ping-ponging these players where he's a bust one week, so you sit him and then he breaks out, because his targets have been comparable to Robbie Anderson. He's getting more air yards than Robbie Anderson. So there is going to be more consistency down the road. It's just a small sample size here in the first 4 weeks of the season. He has already had one really good game. So stick with DJ Moore this week. Who's a tight end, though, you would go with, Kimmy?
All right, so this was a tight end that you had mentioned on your board earlier, and I want to stick with Hunter Henry. Again, we're kind of picking a lot of Chargers players today, and it's because the matchup is actually really good against the New Orleans Saints for Monday night's game. Hunter Henry has had 10-plus fantasy points in 3 out of 4 games this season. Obviously, we're expecting more on Monday night. because the New Orleans Saints have allowed a top 8 fantasy tight end in each game this season. Now, I know Hunter Henry right now, he's ranked 16th amongst fantasy tight ends, but I really do think that that number is going to go up. I think Justin Herbert being the starting quarterback also means good things for Hunter Henry. So if you need a tight end who is going to get you guaranteed fantasy points, it's Hunter Henry on Monday Night Football.
Well, I want to go with Darius Slayton here because, the matchup against the Cowboys is pretty favorable. Their defense has been pretty awful all season long, and I think there's going to be an opportunity for the Giants to sort of get going a little bit offensively. I mean, they've only scored 3 touchdowns this season, which is really unfathomable considering the state of the NFL right now. So I think this is a chance for you to, if you've got a 2 QB league, I think Daniel Jones is a nice opportunity. I think Devontae Freeman can make some plays, but I really do think they're going to have to lean on Darius Slayton to go out and make some plays in the passing game and try to keep up with this high-powered Cowboys offense.
You know what? It's funny because I'm going to be advocating for the Rams defense, and we just saw Danny Dimes dealing against them. And wait a minute. No. I mean it. This is a good start. For the Rams, the reason being the Washington FT made a switch at quarterback this week. They're going to go with Kyle Allen, who, is not Josh Allen. And you saw what the Rams were able to do at times to Josh Allen, where they frustrated him. We're cherry picking the video here, but I do. Anytime you make a quarterback switch like that, I think the Rams or the defense that you're going against is one that you can go ahead and start. And those were our fantasy heroes, just for 1 week. Well, hopefully more, because you probably have them on your team and you want them to keep going. All right, but coming up, it's going to be time to look at the other side of the coin, whatever. It's bust alert time. See which star players, as wise guys say, you might want to bench this week. Plus, our list of sizzling sleepers for week 5. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. And there is jumping Joey Burrow. You know what? Tough matchup this week, and I understand he's on my sit ledger in my stardom sit 'em column. You know what, though? Personally, because I'm a risk taker, I'm not afraid of starting Joey Burrow this week. Yeah, that's right. I'm going to put that out there. I'm going to put that out to the universe. I think that guy has been playing so well. And just in case you missed it, the NFL announced this morning the game with the Broncos and Patriots scheduled for Monday has been postponed. Details on a new game date and time will be announced shortly. Both teams will now have a bye for Week 5, so make sure you get them out of your lineup. But, of course, the Titans announced they have also shut down their facility temporarily after a staff member tested positive for COVID-19. Currently, that game is scheduled for Tuesday and is still a go. And, of course, any news that breaks on that, we will have that for you right here. And welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. A lot of news happening this morning. And right now, though, we want to take a moment and an opportunity to talk about some star players we might be a little bit concerned about this week. And, Kimmy, I will throw it to you. Who's a superstar that you think might not play well this week?
You know what? It's not more so they might not play well this week, because I do think there's a really good matchup for Kenyon Drake. But we have to look at what he's done this season, which is next to nothing. Yes, he's going up against the New York Jets. So if there is ever a week for him to break out and have a week, it's this week, because they've given up 88 points to running backs this season and 5 different rushing touchdowns. But Kenyon Drake is averaging less than 10 fantasy points per game. That's 37th amongst running backs. Earlier in the preseason, I was listening to you, Adam Rank, and you, Marcus Grant, and there was so much hype around Kenyon Drake, and then he's kind of disappeared. Kyler Murray, instead of Kenyon Drake, is he's the one who's rushing and bringing all of those touchdowns into the end zone. Kyler Murray's had 4. Drake has only had 1 rushing touchdown. And a guy who I mentioned at the running back position who's available on waiver wires, and Chase Edmonds, he's also getting some more opportunities than Kenyon Drake. So I understand it's a favorable matchup. I'm hanging on to him one more week, but if he does not perform today, I am done, and I'm breaking up with Kenyon Drake.
Me hyping Kenyon Drake? I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea. Speaking of guys in a slump, though, Matt Ryan, in the last couple of weeks, he's given you fewer than 13 fantasy points in back-to-back games, and now he's got a matchup with the Panthers. And I know you know, the knee-jerk reaction is think, well, it's the Panthers. I mean, he should be able to eat against them, but they've given up the 4th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks so far this season. I understand if you're playing him, it makes sense, because I think the volume is going to be there, because that's just the way that the Falcons offense operates. And if Carolina's able to put up points against the Falcons defense, they're going to have to throw the football. But I would be a little bit wary, just because the Panthers defense has been tougher on quarterbacks than you might originally think.
I think that's one of the most underreported stories of the year. Now, we expected that Panthers offense, you got Christian McCaffrey and Joe Brady. Like, it should be good, but that defense playing so well is kind of underreported until now, until Marcus just broke that news. One player that I'm a little bit worried about this week, though, is Bobby Trees, our guy. We're big advocates of him. He's a great football player. I'm not sure how much I like the matchup this week going up against that team. Chase Young, I believe, is active today, so that should improve the FT offensive line. I could see this being a very low-scoring game between these two teams, and it's going to be one, of course, it'll be on here in Southern California, and people will be turned off the football, having to sit there and watch it and everything like that. But I'm a little bit apprehensive about that. But right now, it is time for Fantasy Insurance presented by Geico. We're going to be talking about some of our favorite sleepers. So, Marcus, I will throw that one back to you.
I'm going to go with Zach Pascal with the Indianapolis Colts. And I know that so far this season, there hasn't been a lot to like fantasy-wise when it comes to the Indianapolis passing game. I absolutely get that. But I like Pascal's production, or his potential for production today against the Browns. He's running most of his routes out of the slot, and that is where Cleveland's had a really tough time covering guys. They've given up 7 touchdowns to players playing out of the slot, giving up some of the most receiving yards in the league as well. So this is an opportunity for the Colts to maybe find a matchup that they like, and for Phillip Rivers to get the ball to a guy who's pretty good with the ball in his hands. I like him as a sleeper this week.
I love that. Another guy that is a really good sleeper this week that I am so lucky that I picked up during the draft when he was still a free agent, it's Devonta Freeman, and he's really going to step up now that Saquon Barkley is still out for the season with that gruesome injury he saw a few weeks ago. Now, the reason that I love Devonta Freeman so much is because he's going up against the Dallas Cowboys. This is like a matchup heaven for me. The Dallas Cowboys have allowed the second most rushing yards per game this season, and that's where they're going to want to exploit that defense, which is why I think Devonta Freeman is going to get all of the carries and all of the opportunities. This really is a must-win game for both teams, actually, but I do think that Danny Dimes is going to be looking to get Devonta Freeman in that offense as much as possible. So I think it's a really good matchup, and I think it could be a breakout game for Freeman.
I'm going to be looking at Justin Jackson this week, and it goes back to the conversation we were having about Derrick Henry, that if you want to wait, and I understand that he's a good enough player that you would want to do this. Justin Jackson is available in about 96% of NFL.com leagues, as you see right there. If you want to wait to the last possible moment and then make your decision on Monday evening, this is a great opportunity to do that. Again, if you have better options, though, if you can flex some guys in, if you have a lot of depth, I understand if you want to just make that change right now. But if you do want to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room, Justin Jackson could end up being the guy who gets the most carries for the Chargers as well, with Joshua Kelly putting the rock on the football. Now, that was Fantasy Insurance presented by Geico. And last week, OBJ put up almost 40 points. So is he back, or was it just a mirage? Find out next, because we're going to be talking about all of Week 5's burning questions. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. And you're looking at Kyler Murray getting warmed up there for the matchup against the New York Jets there at the Meadowlands. And, of course, Kyler averaging 66 rushing yards per game. You know, that would have been nice to give those to Kenyon Drake for all of us who have been suffering with our guy that we, drafted at the end of the first round or anything like that. But welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Kimmy Jacks, Marcus Grant way over there. And we're going to be answering the burning questions for Week 5. Bigger bounce back this week. Russell Wilson versus the Vikings, or Patrick Mahomes against my Las Vegas Raiders. Yes, today they're my Las Vegas Raiders because the Bears have already won. So, Kimmy, who are you going with?
Okay, first of all, let's just say, they only had 20 fantasy points. Guys, they're still really good fantasy quarterbacks. And I'm going to always do my homer pick, but it's because I also believe it. It's going to be Patrick Mahomes, not Russell Wilson. He's good, but Patrick Mahomes is better. Speaking of Mahomes, he's had 20-plus fantasy points in every single game this season. He's one of only 4 quarterbacks to have that stat line. And he's also been really good against the Las Vegas Raiders in the past. In his 4 career games against them, he's had over 25 fantasy points. So speaking of 25 fantasy points, last week the Raiders allowed Josh Allen to over 25 fantasy points. So all the stats, all the numbers, all the things point to this being a Patrick Mahomes bounce back.
I'm going to go with Russ. I mean, the first 3 weeks, Russ was an absolute gourmet chef, getting you more than 30 fantasy points. Last week, he was just sort of a short order cook. He only got you 20-plus fantasy points. This week, I think he goes back to having a couple of Michelin stars next to his name against that bad Minnesota Vikings secondary. Both guys, Mahomes and Russ, need to be in your lineup, but I think this is the week that Russ goes back to truly cooking the way he did the first 3 games of the season.
Yeah, there are definitely no wrong answers here except for Kim's. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Both of those are great options.
What's up with you now liking the Raiders?
Would
Get
you
out of
stop? Here. It's Las Vegas. I'm a Vegas person, so I enjoy, the stage door, Fremont Street, all that stuff. But let's talk about OBJ. He's going up against the Colts. Can he match what he did last week against the Dallas Cowboys? Kim, what do you think?
No. No shade by saying that, but absolutely not. I do think that really was his ceiling game. He has had less than 10 fantasy points in 2 out of 4 games this season. So, yes, he had a breakout performance. He was incredible against the Cowboys. That's because the Cowboys' defense is abysmal. He's going up into a whole different situation against the Colts, who are allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season. So, yay for having a good game last week, Odell Beckham Jr., but fantasy managers who have him, just temper your expectations.
I'm going to echo that as well. I think this week, if you're starting OBJ, you really are hoping for a touchdown, because if he doesn't get in the end zone, it's going to be it's not going to be a fun day for you in terms of fantasy points. I just think the Colts defensively are way too good. And, the Browns still want to run the football primarily. So I just don't see another big day happening for Odell.
And for the record, we're OBJ fans, but we just don't like the matchup. Just don't get it twisted, but it's a tough matchup this week. Terry McLaurin, though, will be playing with a new quarterback this week. What do we think that what does it do to his production? Kim, do you think it makes him better? Does it make him worse? What are we thinking?
I think he's going to continue to have good production. I know we're all waiting for that breakout Terry McLaurin moment, and I still have him in my starting lineup, even with Kyle Allen taking over. The reason because of that is because Kyle Allen had a really good relationship with DJ Moore back when they were both on the Carolina Panthers. When DJ Moore was his receiver, he was getting almost 6 receptions a game, 84 yards per game, and he had 4 different passing touchdowns from Allen in 2019. That's DJ Moore I'm talking about. If you already have that connection and you're a quarterback who's used to utilizing your receiver and utilizing your receiver well, Terry McLaurin is absolutely going to continue to step up. So I'm still starting him. I do think his points could go up with Kyle Allen at the quarterback position.
I'm going to take option C, and I'm going to say he stays right about the same as what he's been doing. I mean, he still is the primary target in this Washington offense. They just want to get the football to him in as many different ways as they can. So I just don't really see any major drop-off, any major improvement necessarily, which I guess is good. If you have Terry McLaurin and you've been starting him, you can keep starting him and sort of hope for about the same level of production that you've been getting to this point in the season.
Yeah, if the floor is 22 fantasy points, that's pretty good, whichever way that shakes out. But let's take a look at some fan questions coming in right now. And the first one is Joshua Kelly or Le'Veon Bell, half-point PPR. Marcus, what do you think?
I'm actually probably going to lean toward Le'Veon Bell in this one. I think they're going to find a way to get him the football because they don't have a whole lot of options. And I don't think my kid necessarily particularly likes that pick, but I think that Le'Veon Bell is a guy who is worth being a flex option. I think you just got to get him in your lineup and hope he catches the ball. Justin Jackson may do a lot of pass catching for the Chargers, so that sort of sways me away from Kelly.
Your boy has been a fan of Joshua Kelly his entire life, so I understand why he's so upset. Kimmy, I'm going to ask you, Eric Ebron or T.Y. Hilton, PPR in a flex league, or in a flex spot, I should say.
You know what? I'm going to go with big Eric Ebron on this one. It's been a huge disappointing season for T.Y. Hilton. I think Eric Ebron has had flashes of really good games this season. The tight end position is really tight right now, so get him in your lineup. I think he could have the potential to have a really good game.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Daniel wants to know half-point PPR, T. Higgins, Jamison Crowder. The Cardinals have been pretty tough this year, but of course the Bengals have the Ravens. So I'm going to go with Jamison Crowder in this one, just as the guy who's going to be the most targeted receiver in this offense. T. Higgins is still going to be fighting for production with Tyler Boyd, the running back out of the backfield, perhaps A.J. Green. So I think Jamison Crowder is probably your safest option. So good luck to you, Daniel. And guess what? We are just 15 minutes to kick off. And it's Sunday FUNDAY! Up next, we're going to be topping off our glasses and getting your lineups ready to shine with our must-starts of the week. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. And here's a big cheers! Earlier this morning, the NFL announced that the Denver Broncos at New England Patriots game scheduled for Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern has been postponed. Details on a new date and time will be announced shortly. Both teams will now have a Week 5 bye. And, of course, be sure to tune into NFL Fantasy Live this week. We will have all the breaking news for you. Also, the Titans announced that they have also shut down their facility temporarily as a staff member tested positive for COVID-19. Now, that game is scheduled for Tuesday. As we are talking to you right now, that game is still on for Tuesday. And again, be sure to continue to check back. We will have all the latest information for you as it becomes available. And time now for 15 minutes to kick off, presented by Geico. And here are the Week 5 notable actives and inactives. The biggest one, of course, being Julio Jones. He is inactive. If you are just seeing this for the first time, go to your lineup right now. Make the necessary changes. We did get some good news, though. We did see that Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, they will be available today going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. Lamar Jackson missed a couple of practices early in the week, but he is ready to go. Great matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals, a team that he has dominated over the course of his career. And Le'Veon Bell, I know we've had a lot of questions about him, but he is active and ready for go. And that was 15 minutes to kickoff, presented by Geico. And, of course, now joining the show, Kimmy Chex, Marcus Grant, and Michael F. Florio, who is here. And who was the one player, Mike? I know you're out there answering all these questions, doing the fantasy gods work. Well, what is the one hot name that you've seen this Sunday?
There was a few, but the one that I got the most questions about was Marquise Brown. A lot of people wondering what to do with him now that he is going to be active. Him and basically the whole Ravens offense gave us quite a scare this week, but they're all going to play. Some players I said I would use over Marquise Brown were Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson, Robbie Anderson, just to name a couple, and DJ Moore. And some that I said I would use Brown over, though, were Stephon Diggs. I said I would play it safe there and go with Brown. I said I would use him over Slayton, AJ Green. So just a lot of questions about the Ravens wide receiver this morning.
All right. Thank you for that advice. And I guess now it's time for Sunday FUNDAY! Wait a minute. Stop. We're gonna do fan questions. I'm gonna do fan questions. No, I'm sorry. We're postponing Sunday FUNDAY. Jimmy G or Joey Burrow at quarterback? Who you got, Florio?
Rank, you're not gonna like this. I would go with Jimmy G. I'm treating this week as a big test for Joe Burrow. I don't love him in this matchup. If he passes it, you could start him with confidence going forward, but I want to see him do it first.
Taking the coward's way out. Dalton Schultz or Hayden Hurst at tight end today, Marcus?
I'm going to say Dalton Schultz, which sort of hurts my heart because I was a big proponent of Hayden Hurst coming into the season, but it just hasn't happened. And as I mentioned earlier, the Panthers defense has been fairly tough. So I'm going to take Dalton Schultz and hope for the target volume.
All right. CeeDee Lamb or Darrell Henderson in the flex standard league. What do you got, Kimmy?
I'm absolutely going with CeeDee Lamb. You're welcome, Michael F. Florio. Earlier on Fantasy Live this week, I talked about CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott being my favorite stack of the week. So get CeeDee into the flex and thank me later.
One more question. Gibson or Deontay Johnson as a flex in a half-point PPR. I love Antonio Gibson this week, but I really love Deontay Johnson, and I would be going with the wide receiver right there. I have a league where I have Gibson and I have Terry McLaurin. I'm like, how do I have so many shares of this Washington FT offense? But I would go with Deontay in that one. All right. Now it's Sunday FUNDAY! Whoop, 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 whoop. Listen, you know what? If you tell me to meet at the buffet, at the Champagne Buffet, at the Fremont, I'm going to be there early. So I'm sorry that I tried to get this kicked off as quickly as possible. But, Kim, who is a player that is going to pop off this Sunday morning?
You know what? It's going to be a quarterback, and it's a quarterback I have never chatted or ever hyped before because I was a little bit shady against him, but he's proved me wrong. It is Ben Roethlisberger. They are going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. I think this is a really good matchup. One, because the Eagles secondary is incredibly banged up, but two, because earlier on that injury board, we saw that his two wide receivers are back and they're healthy. That's Deontay Johnson and Juju Smith-Schuster. So, Big Ben, please do not disappoint me. You've had 2+ passing touchdowns and 18+ fantasy points in every single game this season. Just continue to do those numbers and some so you can prove that I'm a genius and I'm psychic and know that you're going to pop off and ball out.
Yeah, we're still waiting for the Big Ben blow-up game. It very well could happen today. I'm going to go with Adam Thielen, and Kimmy talked about him a little bit earlier in the show. This is what I expect to be a pretty high-scoring game between the Seahawks and the Vikings this evening, and Thielen's going to be the guy that's getting most of the targets from Kirk Cousins. It's a fairly concentrated passing game. Most of the targets going between Thielen and Justin Jefferson. I think Jefferson has a pretty nice game as well, but I do think Thielen's going to be the guy that has the really huge game to try to keep the Vikings in it.
I like that call, and Kimmy, I think you're going to like this one. I'm going with Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Yes!
The Raiders are just the best matchups for running backs right now, allowing the most fantasy points and touchdowns, and they've allowed 28 or more 3 times. I like CEH's chances of doing that because he's seeing big-time volume each week in just the best offense in football.
He's been very consistent. People need to calm down. Quarterback, though, I like this week. Deshaun Watson. Anytime that you have a coaching change, and it's a coaching change with a guy that was reportedly very unpopular. He got into an argument with J.J. Watt, like one of the nicest guys in the league. It's like when you hear an actor has a flare-up with Adam Sandler. Who's upset with Adam Sandler, the nicest guy in Hollywood? So I expect the Texans. And listen, I say this as a guy who pulls for my friends down in Duval County. I'm an AEW guy. I'm Duval till I die. But I'm going to go with Deshaun Watson in this one. All right, favorite quarterback matchups. Marcus, why don't you lead us off here? And you can't use any of those guys that we just said.
Okay, then I'm going to use Kirk Cousins. I mean, I talked about Adam Thielen having the big day, so why not go with his quarterback there? And look, I know all the narratives about Kirk Cousins in primetime games or whatever. I feel like he's sort of gotten over that a little bit. So I like him against the Seahawks, who've given up the second most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. I think this is an opportunity for him to go out there and sling the rock and be sort of effective. And if you were hurting at the quarterback spot or you're worried about Josh Allen potentially on Tuesday, Kirk Cousins is a good option for you.
I like Cousins as a streaming option this week, Marcus. I also like Teddy Bridgewater going up against the Atlanta Falcons, who are just a get-right game right now for all teams. They're allowing a ton of fantasy points to quarterbacks this year, and Teddy's been playing pretty well these last couple of weeks. I think that this is a game where they could have to put up points to keep up with the Falcons. Teddy is a top 12 quarterback for me in the Week 5 rankings.
All right, you guys know what's better than winning football games? It's revenge winning football games, and that is exactly what Dak Prescott is going to do against his former head coach, Jason Garrett, and the New York Giants. He's been dynamic all season. That's because, well, his defense hasn't been, so then he has to play catch up. But I absolutely think this is going to be a huge matchup for Dak Prescott. I don't think that they're going to be in a situation where they have to play from behind, so maybe we won't see him throwing as many passing yards. But regardless, it's revenge, and he's going to ball out.
Well, which side is it revenge for? You don't think Jason Garrett's gonna? I don't know. It's a tough call. But anyways, let's talk about Kyler Murray, who I spoke of previously, and all the rushing yards that he has done. He has accumulated this year, averaging over 66 rushing yards per game. One of the safest floors in all of fantasy football. Now he's got the Jets, and even if it's a game where he doesn't have to throw the ball an awful lot, which I anticipate that he will. But he still has that floor with his running ability. He's been getting into the end zone, it seems like, every week. So I like this matchup. I think this will be a good opportunity for him. I still feel like you could throw a couple touchdowns to Kenyon Drake just to be cool, just to kind of, help us. Just throw us a bone. That's all that we want. All right. Speaking of running backs, who is one that is a must-start for this week? Florio, we'll start with you.
I'm going to go with Todd Gurley this week, and it feels a little gross because Gurley doesn't have 90 scrimmage yards in a game yet this season, but what he does have is 5 touchdowns already, and I think he's in a good spot this week again to find the end zone against a Panthers team that is they're tied with the Raiders for most touchdowns allowed to running backs this season, and that's after allowing the most of the position last year. You can just run on this Panthers defense. We've seen it all year. I like Todd Gurley to find the end zone once, maybe even twice this week, but if he does, then I'm looking to sell high.
All right, let's stay in this exact game, but I'm going to go over to the other team, and I really like the start of Mike Davis this week. Now, there are reports that Christian McCaffrey could come back as soon as week 6, so Mike Davis, please go out and have a day against the Falcons that have allowed 4 different running backs to have at least 19 fantasy points this season. The Atlanta Falcons are also second in the NFL with receptions allowed to running backs. That's 34. So Mike Davis, Teddy B, give him the ball and let him score.
I'm going to go James Robinson here, who's having a fantastic season, the guy who sort of came out of nowhere and really took over that running back job in Jacksonville. Look, I know we sort of talked about the Houston Texans and maybe them rising up this week with a head coaching change. I still think their defense isn't very good against the run, and that is going to help Robinson here. They may have to throw the football a little bit more, but we've seen Robinson be able to go out and catch the football effectively and be part of the passing game. So I think he absolutely needs to be in your lineup this week against Houston.
And as I move us to the wide receiver position, I will note that I would start Kareem Hunt, even though that matchup is tough. Now, our wide receivers, Kim, who is a wide receiver you must start this week?
I'm like doubling down, tripling down, quadrupling down on the Panthers offense, which is why I'm going to go with Robbie Anderson. All I needed to do was get away from Adam Gase. Hey, that's a little shade there. He's had 5+ receptions and 50+ receiving yards in every single game this season. He's one of only 3 players to have that stat line. It's a really favorable matchup against the Falcons. All in on every offensive player on this team. So Robbie Anderson, go ball out for me.
Earlier, I talked about DK Metcalf, so I figured I might as well talk about his running mate as well, and Tyler Lockett. I mean, we keep talking about this Seahawks-Vikings game and how there are going to be a lot of points scored. Tyler Lockett's the guy who's getting most of the targets, and he's the guy they're looking for in the red zone more often. Both Seahawks wide receivers are excellent starts. So Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, put him in. Have a day.
Marcus, you've been talking up this matchup for both sides of the ball. You like Kirk Cousins and Adam Thielen. I do as well, but I also like Justin Jefferson this week. He has shown in the last couple of weeks that he is clearly their second option in the passing game behind Adam Thielen, and I think this is a game where it's a great matchup on paper. Seattle allows the most points and yards to wide receivers, but also I think they're going to have to throw a little bit more to keep up with Russell Wilson in that offense. I think you could start Justin Jefferson with confidence.
Yeah, get involved in everybody in that game. I think my guy would have been Will Fuller, too, going back to all the points I was making about Deshaun Watson. Hopefully that Texans and Jags game is going to be a shootout. Speaking of which, DJ Chark, we like him. Like, I'm benching Derrick Henry because I feel like it's the safest thing to do.
Yeah, I play DJ Chark.
Florio's, he's scared.
I'm shaking my head. I would
He's
do it.
scared to answer. Well, thanks, everybody. Be sure to watch NFL Fantasy Live tomorrow. Same time as always. We will help get you sorted with everything going into Week 5. Thank you so much for watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Good luck, everybody.